back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the Series 7 story, Hyde, written by Neil Cross and is directed by Jamie Payne. This was actually the first story that was filmed for Series 7 Part B, meaning it's the first time that Jenna Louise Coleman got to play the modern incarnation of Clara, and is the first time Matt Smith got to wear his now iconic purple variation of his costume. This story is written by Neil Cross, however, it was not the first story in the series by him, as Rings of Akaten aired first. However, this story was written first, and it was because of the production team's appreciation for this story did he get to write for that story. Now, also a massive fun fact about this story is that originally this was supposed to be a crossover episode with the Doctor and Clara meeting up with none other than Quatermass. For those of you who don't know, Quatermass is this big sci-fi British iconic franchise from the 50s, and I would say the 50s and the 60s. But it was a big, almost an inspiration from Doctor Who. And there have been many talks, and there have been little connections connecting the two universes. Most noticeably, an organisation from the Quatermass franchise was mentioned as if it was part of the Doctor Who universe in the story Remembrance of the Daleks. So that was originally the plan. However, when those fell through, Neil Cross created his own characters to do this very Hammer horror style horror story. This is, for the most part, a horror episode with you've got the iconic elements of a traditional horror movie. You've got the rain, you've got the big mansion, the haunted mansion, you've got ghosts, you've got great lighting and an atmosphere. You've also got the scenes in the forest with the smoke everywhere, the mist, and so there's many elements of horror in this story, to a point where a majority of it does feel like a horror adventure. Now, in terms of the general consensus, is that this story, for the most part, is considered highly guarded. Not like it's like absolutely amazing or anything, but people seem to enjoy it, with the exceptions of some few criticisms, mainly targeted at the very end of the story. But yeah, that's the general consensus. But what is my opinion? The story actually starts off really strongly as we get introduced to these two characters. Alec Palmer, played magnificently by Doug Gray Scott, who just has this iconic voice to him, and sometimes he can clearly come off as boring in some of his performances in other things. However, here he has this really nice, almost shy professor character who develops throughout the story, and we get to see little aspects of his character, and you learn that he's this complicated figure, and he has this kind of survival complex, and it's really interesting. But we also get to introduce to Emma Grayling, played by Jessica Raine, who is now most noticeably in the Doctor Who fandom as playing Verity Lambert in the film The Adventures of Space and Time. So that's awesome. And this is like her first connection to the Doctor Who universe, because this story, of course, aired before Adventures in Space and Time. And she is a psychic. For you see, these two are actually paranormal investigators in the 1970s. I can't remember which exact year this story is set, but it's set in the 1970s. And it has this great aesthetic where it's not exactly gothic in the terms of it's so pompous in Victorian and stuff. Being set in a much more modern aesthetic means that we get a much more 70s feel to the horror element. Again, comparing it to the likes of the Hammer films, which were being released around about this time, though mainly 60s, but the tail end or the tail end at the start of the 70s, so early 1970s. And this story really captures that feeling. And these characters are quite interesting. I know the first time we see them, they're using all of this technical equipment to try and when Grayling goes and tries to discover ghosts, Palmer can use his technology to try and see if he can pick up any information about ghosts and the afterlife. And right off the bat, due to Neil Cross's amazing writing and Payne's amazing directing, this scene, despite the fact it's so clearly setting up a very basic kind of character relationship, does feel more complicated and much more interesting it is. We get small little hints, small little moments in the dialogue and in the characters' play, which establishes quite early on how these characters feel with each other. Where Palmer, before Grayling could activate her psychic abilities, he asks, are you sure you want to do this? And she proclaims, she's worried. These other spirits, they feel so alone, they're so lost. To which Palmer then gets excited with. He gets, he's enthusiastic. He's like, oh, great, that's brilliant news. Okay, let's get on. Which basically establishes he cares for her, but he's also got this passion, this love for the supernatural. It's also really fun to note that this story is filmed in McEdam Castle, and I've actually gone ghost hunting in McEdam Castle. So, yeah, I didn't actually see much. There were some creepy moments, but mind can play on the human person, and it was like there's loads of guests and stuff, and we had people like orchestrating stuff. So that does hide the credibility, but that's a completely different story for another time. The point is that this story is a ghost story set in but it's filmed in a place where I have actually gone ghost hunting. So that's really cool. A really fun little fact. And suddenly they get a knock at the door after having a wild supernatural activity occurring. And when they get the knock on the door and they answer the door, do they get introduced to the Doctor and Clara. Now, and then that's the post-credit scene. That's the post-credit scene, what I'm on about. That's the pre-credit opening. And so that's the cold opener. And it's a great way of setting up the characters, setting up the stakes. And when we get into the story, the Doctor and Clara spend a lot of time with these two characters. And because we only have a handful of characters, and though there is danger, there is stakes, we do get a lot of great time, a lot of great moment of fleshing out our characters, understanding who these people are. Also, I just want to say, this is the first story that Matt Smith filmed for the series again, and you can easily just imagine Matt Smith taking a break, maybe a holiday off after filming The Snowmen or Angels Take Manhattan, depending on how the filming structure works. Him coming to this story and is just full of energy. That scene where he's introducing himself, he pretends to be someone of the government, high up government, investigating their investigation in the ghosts. But he's so full of energy. He's just so amazed and astonished by all the fancy technical equipment, and is just so full of energy. And this series, Series 7, specifically Series 7 Part B, has mainly captured the Doctor, specifically the 11th Doctor, down to a T. And Neil Cross, who did a fantastic job of course, he wrote that speech in the Rings of Akaten, although again, this story was written first. This story clearly shows that he really understands the Doctor. He's somebody who is, again, he loves this adventure. He loves all of these little moments. There's so many moments where he's just smiles at people and is just constantly interested in asking these people questions about how their personal lives and you know, he's just vastly interested in this culture and this environment that he finds himself in. But he's also still an alien. He's also still privileged by the fact that he has this magnificent power that he can go anywhere in space and time. And the human understanding of that, the human emotions of that, don't really cross his mind. And this is greatly set up in many scenes. A great example is when he's explaining to Clara about Graylin and her empathic powers, where she can sense other people's feelings. And the Doctor's just like amazed, you know, he's experienced like they are one of the most kindful, peaceful people you will ever meet. And then he goes off on a tangent about how they're also the loneliest people who have to close everything because you don't know if your emotions are yours or other people's, and everybody else can kind of, they're looking around at each other as if to go, Doctor, this is, you're making things a little bit uncomfortable. But the Doctor has no ill intention. He's basically a kid in this scene. You know, like kids when, you know, they have no bad intentions, but they kind of speak their mind and they don't really understand the consequences emotionally with what they say. The 11th Doctor is like that in a sense, though there are, of course, moments where he brings out his more adult and much more adult persona. So, yeah, let's talk about the main. There's not really much plot. Essentially, our characters are learning about this ghost known as the Witch of the Well, which always seems to be in this pose where it's got its hands out and it seems to be screaming. And we basically we learn about the mythos about this witch in the well and how it seems to have appeared even before the house was even created, and it always seems to be in the same pose, always doesn't seem to be moving. It's almost as if it's trapped in a single moment of its existence. And some of the shots, some of the scenes of this really stand out in it, and there's some really great haunting visuals that are akin to maybe not Hammer horror, but maybe more earlier on, maybe more classic Universal kind of aesthetics. You know, you've got that blink and you miss it moments, and the scenery is shot a lot more basic in that sense, but also still visually striking with the wider focus of how the room is constructed. So really well handled by Jamie Payne, and his director also gets a lot stronger later on in the episode. But the main focus in this story is our four main characters, and that's where the story really shines. One of the greatest moments is actually my favourite scene in the story is the Doctor and Polham. The Doctor seems to have this massive fascination. In fact, he seems to already know these people as historical figures. Now, I'm sure I've read up somewhere that these are real people when this story came out. However, doing my research for this video for the marathon, it turns out that these were actually fictional characters. So it's kind of strange. It is really strange. And the Doctor basically explains like he understands their history as if he knows about them from the future, that he's done his research and has specifically come to this point, which later is resolved in a scene later on and why he's here. But he takes his fascination with Pullman, how despite, you know, he fought in the war, I can't remember, I think World War II or the Vietnam War, depending on, I can't remember when. But anyway, we basically learn through the scene after the Doctor is trying to look at some of Polham's photos, does he basically explain that he sent people to their deaths. He has sent young men and women to their deaths, and he's also killed people. And he feels kind of guilty in the sense that he has survived when so many people who've done their duty, just like him, were killed and brutally murdered in front of his eyes. And there's a great moment where the Doctor's just like, oh, I see, so you want to essentially apologise and you know, you want to talk to them in the vain hopes of reconnecting with those people. If you had to reconnect with those people, what would you say? And Palmer just says, I would thank them for their services. Whilst this scene is going on, which is a great, again, fantastic scene, and we see the layers of this character, Clara and Graylin talk about boys. The girls here are clearly the weakest characters in this story. And I think as well that could be the fact that this story was the first story written and filmed with Jenna Louise Coleman as the modern equivalent. There are many aspects to Clara, many of her performances, of Jenna Louise's performance and some of the dialogue, which kind of gets the feeling that this is a completely different character that we've been following throughout Series 7 Part B. Clara here has these scenes where she almost has a childlike nervousness about this whole ghost, and she kind of asks the Doctor to dare her to go out on the ghost adventures. There's also this kind of raising the eyebrow in concern in certain scenes. Clara just feels, it's really strange. It feels like she's playing a completely different character, another iteration of Clara. I'm almost expecting there in the years to come to reveal that there were actually plans that this was actually, and again, a different Clara, and Claras was supposed to keep dying throughout the series, and the Doctor keeps finding new ones, and this was just a different version of Clara, but however, those ideas got scrapped. That's mainly just a theory of mine, just going by how Jenna Louise Coleman plays Clara in this story and how she's kind of written. But essentially, she can see with Graylin that despite her being an empath and feel other people's emotions, she's conflicted with herself about her feelings with Palmer because she kind of takes a liking to him, and Clara can clearly see that he likes her as well. However, because Graylin is an empath, she doesn't really know. She tries to, she explains to Clara, sometimes their emotions, their abilities can be faulty at times, especially when it's somebody that they're really close to, as if the feelings that they're feeling for that person might actually just be them wanting it in a sense. But Clara basically explains from an outsider's point of view that no, this is actually happening, this is actually real. This all leads then into the mid-section of the story where we get this really interesting scene where the Doctor basically wants to investigate who the witch in the well is after this strange incident where we have this portal appearing throughout the middle of the room and the words, "help me." And the Doctor comes up with this theory, so he takes a camera, he takes Clara with him into the Tardis, and we have this amazing scene where the Doctor actually wears his spacesuit from the Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit, which is a really cool little nod there. And the Doctor does something really incredible. He goes back in time to the very beginning of Earth and takes photos every few millennia or so in the exact same location. This reasonably messes up with Clara, as she points out, we get this really great scene, probably one of the best scenes with Clara, and clearly shows that Neil Cross really had this, had this kind of passion that he wanted, he had an interest in Clara per se, because let's not forget, he wrote The Rings of Akaten. Sure, him writing for Clara in that story was due to commitments from Matt Smith being unable to film for a majority of the story. But here there is no such of that. But Neil Cross gives Clara a lot of character and a lot of depth here, which is a shame because unlike, say, Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss, Neil Cross accurately gives Clara a personality. And essentially Clara is freaked out by the fact that, from the Doctor's point of view, everyone's a ghost, and yet everybody hasn't been born yet. And she tries to ask the Doctor, and is completely messed up by this. And there's this really interesting moment because it ties in with the story arc, the storyline of the series, which is stuff that I've always criticised the series. However, this scene actually plays it really cleverly. Basically, she asks the Doctor, we must be nothing to you if and the Doctor is kind of trying to take it lighthearted when he sees Clara kind of upset by this, and he doesn't really understand per se. He doesn't really see an issue with it. He kind of jokes it off at one point, and then when he sees Clara's really upset, he's like, context, come on, help me understand. To which Clara's like, we must be nothing to you. And the Doctor, he actually points out, no, you're not you. You are, you are important. It's like, how are we important? And the Doctor essentially points out, it's like, you are the mystery worth solving. You're the only mystery worth solving, which of course ties into the idea that the Doctor is curious with Clara being the impossible girl, the girl who died twice and then came back. But it's really interesting because the question that Clara asks, the Doctor avoids it. Sure, he has this space and time. Sure, he has this privilege. Sure, he has this overwhelming joyness and power of the Tardis. But that means that he's kind of distanced himself from real life people and environments in the sense that he can see it from an outsider's point of view, but he can't really understand from the inner point of view of a person, of a character, of an individual. And that's really interesting. Again, Neil Cross really gets the 11th Doctor here, and Matt Smith just runs with his script. They're so imaginative. And in the story, we basically get a crossroad where the story becomes less about horror, but it still has those horror trappings, those horror mood and aesthetics. However, the story has a much more scientific spin on it, as we essentially learn that the ghost isn't actually a ghost at all. It is an individual, as the Doctor explains, one of the first time travelers in human history, and she basically got stuck in this parallel dimension where time acts differently. A few seconds to her is 1,000 billion trillion years to the people in our universe. That's why she seems to be still. It's not that she's still, it's that she is moving at incredibly slow speeds. And that's why the Doctor took all those photos from Earth's beginnings to Earth's end, so that they can see her moving using imagery. And we basically learn that she is just trapped in this alternate dimension, where we then get introduced to the Crooked Man. This really warped, almost half zombie man, half spider looking creature. Now, the props and the costume design in Doctor Who is always being like top notch, and this is no exception. But that design, especially when you get the close up at the very end of the story, is absolutely horrifying. That seems like something which this story should get like an R rating. Like, it's got like a human, almost bony face, and like the jaw is distorted in a sense that like it's got like this really like broken neck of sort, and its jawline. It's got this really warped, really unsettling design. It almost reminds me of a way of the Resident Evil games. It's just a really great, fascinating design, and we get a lot of and even throughout the story we have these little moments, these little shots, these little thickets of these creatures' designs, and they are absolutely haunting. And so the Doctor basically uses a crystal from Metabelus 3, which Matt Smith mispronounces, but it is a nice little callback to the Planet of the Spiders and the Green Death, to which the third Doctor, gains this crystal. Some have theorised that it could just be a different crystal from a planet that's got a very similar name. But Metabelus 3, that was the intended reference, but Matt Smith mispronounces it, which is kind of annoying, but as a fan, but it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. This crystal, of course, has psychic abilities, as we learn in those two Third Doctor stories, which enhance psychic abilities, which the Doctor uses to grade him, attaching her to these this is equipment which actually allows the portal to open into this parallel universe, and then to save this time traveler, and it basically becomes a rescue mission from for this time traveler character to try and get her away from the Crooked Man's dimension before this universe just evaporates and dies within, I believe they say, 3 minutes. And so the Doctor goes in, and we get this into this forest scene. Now, this is where Jamie Payne's directing really shines. Look at the behind-the-scenes shots, and this scene was shot like in the day. You had bright blue skies. It was very well shot, and it was a very nice day. However, the directing really gives this scene a sense of dread, and the post-production work, the color grading in the story really gives off this this professional horror film, modern film feel to it, almost as if this story is from the Conjuring films. In fact, a lot of this elements has many similarities with the Conjuring, with our main protagonists being a psychic lady and a professor, and they have this kind of relationship, and they investigate in the supernatural, and they have almost like an expert knowledge of the supernatural. So that's actually, yeah, I don't know if that was intentional, that it was like a similarities to the Conjuring films, but yeah, that's a thing. And we get some really great intense scenes where the Doctor finds this traveller. We see the Crooked Man. The Doctor rescues her and takes her into a psychic projection of the mansion. He gets her out. He gets her safe. But before the Doctor could escape, the Metabolus Grayling fails in keeping up this energy, the psychic energy, trapping the Doctor within this parallel dimension. And we get some really great iconic shots, really great iconic moments. I am the Doctor and I am afraid. Where the Doctor is basically being chased around by essentially the boogeyman. And the Doctor basically is trapped with no way of escaping, no plan. And it's up to our characters in our dimension to essentially get the Doctor back. Now, the story does kind of struggle a bit in terms of its terminology, but it's actually kind of easy to understand when you watch it a few times. Essentially, Clara goes to Grayling, who first refuses to open the portal. So Clara goes to the Tardis to try and get the Tardis to transport into this pocket dimension to save the Doctor. To which Clara doesn't get in because, as established in stories like The Rings of Akaten and Clara and the TARDIS, the TARDIS doesn't like Clara that much. In fact, the TARDIS actually makes a hologram to communicate with Clara, and the hologram basically explains that using all of your subconscious memories, this hologram of you best suits the criteria, basically saying that Clara is in love with herself. I love Clara's reaction. It's like, oh, I knew you were a cow. But anyway, we need to go save the Doctor. And so we have this dilemma of Clara trying to convince the TARDIS to go into this parallel dimension, this pocket dimension. Whilst back at the house, Grayling actually gains the strength, gains the courage to actually open the vortex again using Palmer. Palmer basically is like, you don't have to do it. You've put so much pain, so much strain in yourself. You saved this woman's life. You don't need to prove yourself anymore. You don't need to risk yourself again to save the Doctor. He went in there. He knew the risks. And she kind of sees that, Palmer, this is where the relationship starts blossoming, and she kind of sees that Palmer cares for her a lot, but she also understands that she can't leave the Doctor there, so she actually opens the portal again. to hopefully get the Doctor out. But at this point, Clara actually gets in the TARDIS as the TARDIS opens its doors. Now, the way the scenes are shot, the way the scenes are structured, it feels like these scenes of the TARDIS being able to go back into the Pocket Universe and Graylin opening the portal have nothing to do with each other. When you see the story like that, it is a kind of a struggle, because that means that we have two basically plot lines that build up to the resolution of the story to save the Doctor. But only one actually pays off, the one with Clara sending the TARDIS to the Pocket Universe. But and Graylin's Graylin's suffering seems to tie in to none of it. However, when you look at it through a timeline, through a pacing, it actually kind of comes kind of clear. The TARDIS originally refused to go and save the Doctor because there wasn't this gateway, there wasn't this way of opening it so it doesn't harm the TARDIS to the point where it will self-destruct easily in this pocket dimension and suffocate. However, when Graylin opened it, it basically let the two worlds connect in a way that the TARDIS can survive, can thrive in this pocket universe. And that's how the storylines connect. And that seems to end the story as the Doctor gets jumped on by this crooked man, and the footage is actually really well done. Essentially what they did with the crooked man is they actually filmed the actor move backwards, and then they played it in reverse, changing the speeds around to give the crooked man this really odd, really strange movement to it, which really gives the crooked man this really strange aesthetic presence in the story. And that seems to be the resolution of the story. The Doctor actually asks Graylin at one point, before what seemingly is the final resolution of the story, the Doctor asks Graylin about Clara. We basically learn that the reason the Doctor came to them, is so that he can ask a empath, he can ask Emma Graylin about Clara, about who she is really. And Graylin's just like, she's just a normal girl, she's just an ordinary girl, you know, she's enthusiastic, she's hyper, she's a bit more scared than she lets on, but other than that, she's just a normal girl. Is there anything wrong with that? You can kind of feel Neil Cross asking Stephen Moffat kind of the same questions. It's like, does Clara have to be more than just a basic girl? It's just, you know, it's just a really funny little line. And the Doctor basically is like, resolution is like, you know, she is actually, the time traveling lady is actually your great granddaughter of both of you. So you're gonna make babies, and this is gonna be your great grandchild. That's why the connection between you two is so strong. Is because of the blood, the genetics, and it's before the story has been great to this point, very atmospheric and really well handled. Now this is an element now, because the story it still has about another 2 minutes to go, and with it introduces still another plot point, another plot twist that completely changes the story from the characters and from the audience's point of view as well. And this is where the story either loses people, or, you know, this is one of the controversial moments that kind of split the fan base on this particular story. Now, I feel like, I personally don't like it, but I feel like the rest of the story is so strong and so good with it, around it, that the ending, though bugs me, doesn't bug me as much that I would now hate this episode for it. We essentially learn through a way which I don't really understand. The Doctor realises there are actually two crooked men creatures. One actually in the real world, in this house, and another one in this pocket dimension. And we essentially learn that it's not a horror story, it's a love story, as the crooked man and this other one, which is seemingly is a female, one of them's a female, they're mates. their mates, and they've been split somehow through this, through these dimensions. And the story ends with essentially the Doctor getting Graydon to open the portal again, reuniting with the Crooked Man, and promises to take him to his universe so he can reunite with its partner. And that's Hyde. Overall, this story is so strong in so many places. Neil Cross's writing, brilliant. Matt Smith's acting, gorgeous. Doug Gray Scott, Jessica Raines, Jenna Louise Coleman, Jamie Payne's directing. Everything is just clocked together so nicely and so tight for the majority of the story. However, what loses people is that ending, and it does actually hurt the story as well, as certain elements, now knowing that the Crooked Man isn't actually a benevolent creature that whose moral compass and goals are beyond human understanding, some of the story kind of doesn't make sense. For example, if it was the time traveller that's scared and terrifying, who wrote the "Help Me" line on the wall? See, it doesn't make much sense, innit? And that's, there are certain elements of the story that doesn't kind of make sense when you add that up. But I feel like the majority of the story is strong enough that it still holds up as a great episode, in my opinion. It's just that ending that really bugs me and that really sends me the wrong way. But it's not enough that, in my opinion, it hurts the episode. In my mind, I can just easily go, that ending didn't exist. Just pretend that ending didn't exist. And keep this story a nice horror story, which is much more kind to how Doctor Who used to be during the Philip Hinchcliffe era. And as somebody and if you know me as well enough, you know that Philip Hinchcliffe is my favourite showrunner. So a story which is a Philip Hinchcliffe style story in the Matt Smith era was something that was always going to appeal to me. So Hyde, great story. So join me next time where the Doctor meets up with a band of bounty hunters, of whatever they are, scrapyard workers, to try and track down Clara in one of the most dangerous places, one of the most chaotic, one of the most dangerous, maddest places in the Doctor Who universe. One where the Doctor has to be not only concerned for Clara's well-being, but for her to reveal some of the Doctor's biggest secrets. So join me next time for the journey to the centre of the Tardis. And I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-ra!